is wokeism on its way to extinction? Not because all of its ideas are being defeated in academia or journalism, Hollywood, but because they just don't have enough kids. We've talked about this before, but the numbers are in and it is absolutely drastic. The bottom line is woke women simply do not have enough children to actually sustain this as a ideological movement going into the future. Conservative women, by contrast, have significantly more children. And so this begs the question, can wokeism even survive its own ideology? This is what we'll be talking about today on Making the Argument. And we will be considering some recent statistics on this and talking about some of the underlying philosophical considerations, which, again, make it unsustainable in one sense, but probably also explains why the left is doing other things in order to make up for the deficiency in childbearing. All right, Christian, go ahead and take us away with the first stat that we're going to look at here.
Okay, so I've got a tweet here that I just want you to read off because it's pretty mind-blowing.
Okay, the fertility rate of U.S. liberal white women aged 25 to 35 is 0.51. Holy crap, that's like smaller than South Korea. White liberalism is now a death cult whose value proposition is amuse yourself to death. Optimize for harm reduction long enough, and you end up optimizing for nonexistence, the only state without pain. It's kind of an interesting way to look at it. And yeah, you can tell by the mean children by ideology. So it looks like conservative women have about 1.43 live births per woman, which is still, by the way, still below replacement rate. But yeah, it's almost 3 times higher than liberal women who, ever since the 2010s, have just fallen off a cliff. They were at 0.87 in the 2010s, and that's nearly been, it's
It's been almost cut in half even from then.
Yeah, 0.51. That's crazy. Whereas it was the conservative women's birth rate is actually starting to go up again. It looks like it's close to being the highest it's been since the 1980s. Yeah.
I mean, we've had below replacement level birth rates for quite a long time.
Yeah.
It just hasn't really shown up in the demographics because we have immigration, which we will get to in today's podcast.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to show you this in part because I think the framing that he used here is spectacular about, basically what's happening on the left, right? If you optimize for harm reduction long enough, you're just going to, breed yourself out of existence.
It's nihilistic because life by definition includes harm. It includes challenge. It includes some degree of suffering. It can be relative to your circumstances, but there's going to be less than ideal situations. If avoiding harm is your central ethic, well then not being born or not causing others to be born is the chief way to guarantee you reach that.
And I love his line about, the central value proposition for liberalism now is amuse yourself to death. I think that's a perfect explanation of where we are on the left at the moment. But this number is, to give you an idea, this is worse than South Korea, worse than Taiwan, worse than Japan. It's so bad that within about 3 generations, you would cease to exist.
Yeah.
The math is such that you would have 90 to 95% population loss within about 3 generations.
That's nuts. Well, that always kind of surprises people because for the longest time we've always heard, if you think about a core component too of the left is also the idea that the planet is dying, that we're a virus, we're a parasite on the planet. And so having more kids is obviously, eating away at these already scarce resources. So even if you're not doing this to reduce harm in people, if you're for animals, if you're for the planet, right, the central bad guy in all of their themes is the Western person. And so it makes sense that if somebody really believes that, if they really adopt this as an ideology, well, then of course, having fewer kids is not just something you would do in order to give yourself more resources or more time to do what you want, or, the whole thing where it's, the wine woman that never had a family, never had kids, just has money and wine and amuses herself however she wants. That could be seen as more hedonistic. There's another trend of this that is like, no, I am saving the world by not having kids.
I think it's both.
I think it is too. Because the bottom line is hedonism doesn't really motivate people long term. You actually get bored with entertainment. Everyone understands this. except for maybe people living in countries where they're fighting for subsistence at all times. You get bored of entertainment when it's so abundant in the West. And so you have to search for some sort of moral justification for what you're doing in order to find some semblance of meaning. And again, in this case, not having kids is a way that they try to get some semblance of meaning.
Well, it's part of the problem here is viewing children as kind of like a limitation on freedom, right?
Which they are.
They are in a way. So like if you put freedom in the abstract, right? Pure, kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Self-actualization at the pinnacle of human existence. And it's, the most important thing is to be a fully autonomous, liberated, almost Rousseauian type degree of freedom. Because, when we say freedom in the U.S., we're thinking of like the Constitution, the Bill of Rights, individual liberty.
I think when conservatives generally speak of freedom, they're largely talking about political freedom, which is to say that I'm free from some sort of oppressive entity in the form of the state or a feudal lord or whatever it might be, but it's usually the state, infringing on my ability to just kind of live my life and make my own decisions. But if you extrapolate that out to any sort of obligation, and the left does, well, you're not free because you have to work for your own food. Yeah, like every other creature on the planet, right? But again, they that makes sense to them. No, anything that prevents you from doing exactly what you want to be doing is now an infringement on your right to be free. And it's obviously that would apply to children. I say this all the time. Getting married does not make you freer. And yet I am significantly more happy that I'm married than if I wouldn't be. Having children did not make me freer. And yet I am significantly more happy that I have children than when I didn't. And I think you're right. It goes to the idea of freedom is a fine thing within its proper context, but you can't make it your supreme ethic.
And I think that that's the direction that the left kind of went on this, right? Like they have taken Rousseau to his logical conclusion. It's not just Rousseau, right? I'm going after him. Maybe I wouldn't say I'm actually going after him a little bit too hard, but the point is that when you put freedom in the abstract as the highest principle, divorced of any other social bond or limitation on your sovereign will as a kind of floating bundle of rights, then yeah, you're going to be like, well, why have kids? That makes me less free. Yeah. Right? Yeah. Why get married? Right? Because then I have obligations to my spouse. No, I'm just going to go and, be this sovereign will who just, achieves my self-actualization independent of anybody around me. Yeah. And when you become a fully, I don't know what you would call it, like fully atomized individual with no sort of connections or social bonds with anybody else, that type of person is kind of selecting for non-existence over the long run.
Well, and it also treats other human beings ultimately as if they're all just side characters in your story. So even the people that would say, no, I like social relationships, I like to get along with people, they still like it from the standpoint of almost exclusively, what do you do for me? And it also factors into the way that they look at long-term relationships like marriage. There was that really popular book, What Eat, Pray, Love. And it was this idea that, oh gosh, this woman has really unlocked something, until you find out that within her own personal life, she kind of just threw people aside that should have meant something to her the moment that they weren't feeding into what she needed from them. And it does end up ultimately being kind of a very selfish way to look at reality to include human interactions. But as I said before, not all freedom is, freedom, especially political freedom, is a good thing. Another good form of freedom is freedom from credit card debt. And that's where American Financing comes in. I want to thank them for sponsoring this episode. I have worked with American Financing before. They do absolutely outstanding work in helping people escape high interest credit card debt. Nick, how do they do this? Well, if you are a homeowner, American Financing can come in, work with you, and help use the equity in your home in order to consolidate all of those high interest loans into one low interest debt, usually somewhere in the 5% range, which, if you know anything about credit cards, is significantly lower. In fact, American Financing right now is saving their average customer about $800 a month off of those high interest credit card debts. So look, understand something. A lot of people got into credit card debt because of things like COVID, because of some sort of unforeseen medical emergency. Maybe they lost a job, whatever it was. It's not as if they were out there just, spending money on frivolous things. They were trying to just make ends meet. call up American Financing, see whether or not they can help you out, right? Because again, these guys are not blowing up your phone. They're not trying to sell you something that doesn't work for you. They have a particular plan that can be customized for you that can help you get out of this debt. And all you have to do is go over right now to 866-886-2026. That's 866-886-2026, or visit AmericanFinancing.net/MTA. That's AmericanFinancing.net/MTA. Go check them out today. All right, let's go ahead and get back to it.
All right, so I've got some more statistics that I want you to take a look at. Here's one. Family studies showed what percentage of parents had children by ideology. And look at this gap right here. So mean children captures who has kids and how many. This is broken down. This is by men. So these are mean children by ideology, conservative versus liberal, 25 to 35-year-old men. And oh my gosh, it's so bad for liberal men. They're basically not having any kids at all.
No.
Conservative men are having 1.06, still really bad. But liberal men, they've just fallen off a cliff, 0.35%. That's basically been cut in half from where it was in the 22, so a decade ago.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that, I mean, it was, again, you can go back to the 1980s, it was lower for liberals than conservatives, but you see the same trend with men here. Here it is with women. It's really bad. Like, you can just see that they were kind of moving in tandem until the 2010s, where conservatives were always higher, but they were moving directionally.
Yeah.
And then you had something, this is around the time of the Great Awakening, if you think about it, right? Great Awakening typically, depends on who you ask, but it begins anywhere from like 2012 to 2014 or 2015. I think the sweet spot is 2013 or 2014. And
you know what's interesting too is I bet if you lowered the ages on this, so right now this female age is 25 to 35, because those are generally considered like, you know, the primary years, because a lot of women are in college till 25 and women attend college at higher rates than men at this point. But I'm willing to bet if you drop that to ages 20 to 35, you would actually see a bigger uptick in conservative women having kids, and you'd see it even lower for liberal women having kids. Because again, as you expand those years out, I don't think the liberal number gets higher, but I'm willing to bet the conservative number would get higher. And I say this too in part from my own experience, right? Like Tina and I started having kids in the 2000s, and our youngest was born when Tina was 23. So, and I see this a lot too when I visit like great homeschool conventions, homesteaders conferences, when I see places that are kind of deeply conservative, more religious and whatnot, you do see conservative women having kids, you know, younger than 25.
so here's another one that I want to show you.
Yeah. Wow.
Extremely conservative men, 35 to 45, have almost 4 times as many children as extremely liberal men.
Yeah.
What's interesting here is that the extremely conservative is almost at replacement level.
Well, 2.1 is considered replacement. I mean, they're at it. The 2.09 is, you know, close, but what it basically shows is conservative and at least extremely conservative are not losing population.
I mean, this is
Yeah.
it's almost non-existent. If you're a liberal man that's a millennial, right? You know, 35 to 45, those are basically millennials right now.
Yeah.
If you are a extremely liberal man, you don't have any kids.
Yeah.
It's just as simple as that. If you're an extremely conservative man, luckily I'm not yet 35 because I still have 0 kids.
Yeah.
I'm not married. The funny thing is we're talking about this and I'm meeting the liberal criteria here. I'm not married and I don't have any kids.
He's still single, ladies.
I'm also, I just turned 32 like a couple weeks ago. So we'll see. I mean, maybe, I don't know. But look, the fact of the matter is that over the long run, this is not sustainable for the left. Like, you are breeding yourselves out of existence here. And what's so, to me, what's so crazy about this is that it just keeps getting worse over time. Like, so this account here, I want to bring him up just because I want to give him some credit. This account, Charlie Smirkley. I don't know if that's his actual last name or not, but
yeah, I don't think so. But yeah.
He compiled all of this data from basically some general social surveys that take place every single year. They go back to, I think, like the 1970s, and he charted these things out. And I mean, he's still pumping this stuff out. Look, he just got something a few hours ago. Take a look at this. The childless rate by political ideology. So percentage with 0 children.
Wow.
These are white non-Hispanic. So we're talking just about whites by ideology, right? So from extremely conservative to extremely liberal, these are the percentage of people that don't have any kids.
Yeah.
64% of extremely liberal men
Yeah.
aged 35 to 45, 2/3 of them have no kids. Only 20% of extremely conservative men.
Yeah.
And for women, I mean, this is pretty crazy. In part because you have a couple things in biology, like one of them is like the Bateman principle.
Yeah.
But like statistically, women have kids
clock.
more often than men. Like if you go back far enough, like women have a higher reproductive rate than men. Like men get themselves killed in stupid things. They'll die in wars. They'll like there's a lot. History shows that there's a lot of men that don't reproduce, but because women have to be the one that bears the child, statistically, they're far more likely to become a parent at some point in their life than the man is. So it makes sense that the numbers are smaller for women, but this is just not sustainable. 35 to 45, you're already like in, the height of your career, right? You're entering middle age. By the time you get into this 10-year time frame, historically, most of these people would have already had at least one kid. I mean, historically, they would have had 3, 4, 5, 6, right? But I mean, more than 1/3 of extremely liberal women, no kids. For extremely conservative women, it's only 14%.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say other than like this data is crazy. So, a lot of people kind of saw this stuff and they were running with it and they were like, well, this explains quite a lot if you think about it. I did some math and I want your thoughts on this. So I wrote this a couple months ago, but it's actually pretty relevant to the data that's now coming out today, because there was one additional graph that I want to show you, which is, again, percentage who have a kid by ideology going back to the 1980s. Mm-hmm. You see that men, it's been dropping across the board. But I mean, again, like this is just insane. And for women, it's actually been stable for conservatives, but for liberals, they're falling off a cliff.
Yeah.
And this is 25 to 35-year-olds. So I replied to this, and I actually did the math that goes into these other charts that we were talking about earlier. And here's what I had to say. The children of liberals adopt their worldview about 89% of the time. I looked this up when I wrote this. And conservatives have theirs adopting, their worldview about 81% of the time. So it's actually not surprising if you think about it that liberals have a higher retainment rate for their ideology when you consider what they control. Yeah. Right. They control all the institutions.
Well, yeah. If we look at the culturally shaping institutions, which really help develop a child's worldview, probably the primary one is your public school system. But in addition to that, it's also arts and entertainment, it's Hollywood, et cetera. And the thing is these things feed off of one another. It's important to understand that the more time you have with your children, the less influence something like music, friends, Hollywood has with your children. But if you send your children off to school and now they're spending 8 hours a day, 5 days a week from you, it stands to reason that not only is the school going to be more influential, but also their friend networks, the things they learn at school, the things that they're exposed to at school, plus arts, entertainment, media, and things of that nature, because so much more of that is taking place outside of your supervision. And so this is not to suggest that the way that you convey your values to your kid is you lock them in a closet and you don't let them see anything else. It's more about making sure that, especially during age-appropriate times and formative times of their life, you're able to convey your values. But if your values are competing with all of this, well, then it's not surprising that when the culturally shaping institutions from arts, entertainment, public school, plus higher education are all pushing in one direction. I'm actually shocked that 81% of conservatives kids adopt that worldview, because I would actually think that number would be lower given the competition that conservative ideology is up against. But
so it's an 8-point gap, which isn't great, but like you said, it arguably could be way worse when you consider that the left has hijacked, the Gramscian long march to the institutions is over. Yeah. In the sense that there's nothing else that they can march through, right? Like they've already taken all the newspapers, all the TV stations,
all the universities.
Let's
get back, because I don't want to do the total black pill route here.
No. This is actually, there's a secret white pill here.
Okay, we'll get to the white pill in a second. But I guess what I'm saying is that there is still some conservative control. It's just it depends on what you're talking about. Like in the church, this is devastating, but it's probably about 60-40 in favor of more of a conservative worldview. But the left has made huge inroads. Politics is different, but it's a difference between the elected world and the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy is overwhelming left wing. And to your point, higher ed, the public school system, I just posted about this today where I'm like, you need to understand that there is no area within the public school system that the left is not trying to push a particular narrative. So again, to your point, I don't want to, obviously you have the Liberty University, you have Hillsdale, right? You have things like Fox News, which tend to be more on the conservative side, but they're still up against a massive apparatus that is largely leftist in nature. So yeah.
So I said there was a secret white pill in there.
Yeah.
The point that I'm trying to get across is, unless you have an explicitly, it's almost like Robert Conquest's second law. Any institution that's not explicitly right wing will inevitably become left wing. By the way, the additional add-on that you should put on at the end of that is the government itself is an institution.
Yeah.
But setting that aside for a second, when you think about that, everything that's not, again, explicitly conservative has already been taken over.
Yeah.
The media, academia, and arts and entertainment, Hollywood, Silicon Valley, big tech, all of them have been hijacked.
Yeah.
The Gramscian Long March is over. And even with that, they were only able to pull off an 8-point advantage.
That's shocking.
That is shocking. So the numbers get way worse for liberals as you keep reading here. So we know, I brought this up earlier. We know that we know that women have kids at a higher rate than men across the board. That has always been the case. But conservative men have kids at a higher rate than liberal women, which is, again, that is shocking when you think about the biology at play here. That means that 59% of conservatives become parents using this math here.
Yeah.
59% of conservatives become parents, while just 31% of liberals do. That is almost a 2 times fertility advantage. And when you multiply these numbers by the ideological retainment rate from both sides, I think I have a typo here, and I think it says detainment when I wrote this. Wouldn't be a Christian tweet if there wasn't a typo in there. But anyway, if you multiply these numbers by the ideological retainment rate on both sides, you end up with basically this. 59 times 0.81 equals 47.8. 31 times 0.89 equals 27.6. So that rounds to a minimum of 48 conservative aligned children per 100 conservative adults, compared to a minimum of just 28 liberal aligned children per 100 liberal adults.
Yeah.
In short, conservatives are reproducing their worldview at a 70% higher rate than liberals do.
By sheer, because we have more kids is what it really comes down to.
Yeah.
So conservative worldview is actually a lot more resilient within the public square than we thought it, than you might otherwise think it would be. It's certainly more resilient than the liberal one with respect to conveying it over to children, which is positive. But there's still, again, because there's so much dominance of those culturally shaping institutions, that still means that they're able to keep themselves in the game. Because at this point, you would look at these numbers and you would say, "This is it. You're done. You have a birth rate equivalent to South Korea." Yeah, you've got a generation to go, and you're absolutely wiped out. And yet, that's certainly not the way it feels when you look at social media. And let's, for a second here, let's take off the bot farms and everything else, right? It's certainly not how it feels when you generally talk to younger people. And to some degree, this is a phenomenon that, is as old as time. Winston Churchill talks about it, where he says, if you're young and not a liberal, you have no heart. If you're old and not a conservative, you have no brain. It's the idea. It's that pull between what my heart wants and the desire for people to be happy and to be healthy and to be prosperous, but not having developed the experience or maybe sometimes the critical thinking skills or the cognitive ability to understand which sorts of policies or behaviors actually achieve those things. That's all understandable, right? The 5-year-old screams for the candy bar, not because they've made a great, excellent argument, but because they know they desire it and to them it is good. It takes the parent to come in and say, well, no, you can't just eat candy bars. That's very bad for you. And that's kind of the overall theory that went with that. But I've got a stat that I just pulled up. Mm-hmm. And so I asked Grok, I said, here's what it came down to. From the Education Freedom Institute analysis of the 157,000, this is primarily in the 2022 election cycle, of the 157,556 individual campaign contributions by K through 12 public school teachers, 68% of donations from K-12 teachers went to Democrats, 32% went to Republicans. So first of all, I'm actually surprised it's not higher on the Democrats within the public school system. But again, there's a lot of things in here that, the criteria they looked at, this is individuals, teachers, donations, not unions or PACs. Teachers unions, NEA and AFT, that's National Education Association and American Federation of Teachers, give 95 to 99% to Democrats almost every cycle. And remember that every teacher, to include the conservative ones that are members of those unions, have to pay their union dues to an organization that's been. Professors, higher education, are far more lopsided, 93% to Democrats. So the question is, if liberals are so against raising their own children, why do they go into fields like education where they're now going to be responsible for the education of other people's children? And now I think you can look at a lot of factors that go into this. I don't think it's one big nefarious, strategy here, but I also don't think you can ignore the fact that the left generally views public education, I think, differently than conservatives view public education. The left views public education as an institution that they use to correct your parenting. I actually tweeted this out today. I'm going to pull a Christian here and read one of my tweets. But before I read that, I want to talk about our partners over at Angel Studios. Ladies and gentlemen, Angel Studios is the streaming service you've been waiting for. If you're a parent that is concerned about what your kids are watching, but by the same token, you still want to give them access to entertainment, there's still times where it's okay for the kids to be able to sit down and watch a movie. And yes, every once in a while, it would be nice if they could sit down and watch something without you having to sit there and monitor every single second to make sure some sort of woke nonsense garbage doesn't show up on screen, as is so common in other streaming services. What Angel Studios does is it provides not only great quality in entertainment and information, but it also has things like the Guild and the Parents Guild, where parents actually watch the various programs on there and can give them an upvote. They can let other parents know that, hey, we think this is safe. We've watched it, and now we're giving you the same assurance that we wanted. And for right now, you can go over there and you can go to angel.com/Nick, join the Angel Guild, and you'll be able to watch The Death of Recess. I recently watched this, and it's all relevant to what we're talking about right now and what we're about to go into with respect to education. The Death of Recess on Angel goes into the details of a number of things that have been going on into your public schools and why they're happening. Not to mention the fact, tells you a little bit about what you can do about it. Because it's not just that the death of recess is a problem, it's also all of the other ideological drives that are being pushed onto your children, whether you understand it or not. Please believe me when I tell you, I served in the Virginia Education Committee in the House of Delegates for 4 years, and I saw so many things going on there that would make your average conservative parent jaw drop, right? So go over to angel.com/Nick, join the Angel Guild, and go watch The Death of Recess on Angel right now. If you're a parent or care about the future of kids, this film will change how you see the education system. Go over and check them out right now. So this is what I posted actually earlier today. I said, many will not like reading this, but it's a fact. Having served 4 years on the Education Committee in the Virginia House of Delegates, I can tell you that there is no school district in the Commonwealth, no matter how rural or conservative, that Democrats are not trying to mandate indoctrination that runs contrary to your principles. That's not hyperbolic. It's reality. They don't call it indoctrination because they don't see it that way. They see it as correcting the mistakes of your parenting, which in their view is not progressive or tolerant enough. And since they don't have enough of their own kids to win elections, they need yours to think correctly about these things before they reach voting age. So in their view, this is essential to preserving our democracy. Makes sense now? Now, someone will read this and ask me, why didn't you fix it? And the answer is simple, because we never had sufficient votes to get the legislation passed. It wasn't for lack of submitting bills or fighting for them. Not a single Democrat would vote for any of it. And as long as they controlled just one part of the legislative process, they could prevent all of it because that's how the system works. In my entire 10 years in the General Assembly, there wasn't a single year where they didn't at least control one part of the process. But now, this is in Virginia, nothing is preventing them because they have the votes and they control the entire process. And that kind of leads us into this next part about, okay, so if you're on the left, if you're extremely liberal, if you're a woke progressive, and you absolutely believe that that worldview is moral and just and the one that absolutely has to win out if you're going to have a moral and just society, well, then, of course, you've got to come up with some sort of strategy to offset the fact that you don't have enough kids. Now, one of those strategies is immigration. You can import new populations. But the other strategy is you educate your opposition's children. And when you look at those numbers that I showed about higher ed being 93% liberal, when you look at your average, individual donations, we're not even talking about teachers union, individual donations from people that list themselves as public school teachers, 68% of them going to Democrats. When you think about the fact that when you look at university systems, because again, if you want to teach in a public school, what do you need? You need a degree and a teaching credential. Well, when you go to a university, that's almost, you've got about an 80 to 90% chance that your university system is going to be liberal. But then when you go into the education department, that's among the most liberal departments within the university system. So even if you just went into education, and let's say you're not really ideologically driven one way or the next, you just want to educate kids because you love it, you are now about to be inundated with a higher education system that is specifically designed to change the way you view not just education in general with things like critical pedagogy, but it's designed to actually change the way you think about the world itself. So even if you don't walk right into your classroom and say, oh, today we're going to do critical theory 101 in 5th grade, you were taught a critical theory approach to education. So when you teach math, when you teach history, when you teach English, when you teach these stuff, it is already baked into the system that this is the worldview, this is the lens through which you see things. Then put on top of that, then in your more blue states, and I saw this because it happened in Virginia for the 2 years that they had control when I was still in, they passed all kinds of new requirements to either get your teacher's license or renew it. And it was chock full of critical theory, critical race theory, queer theory, and they told parents left and right, no, it isn't. It's nowhere in your children's curriculum. Yeah, you're right. They weren't dropping off queer theory books in your kid's junior high classroom. They were requiring your teachers to go through additional training and education to renew their license, and that's where it came through. So they weren't going after your kids directly in a way that parents could see it in a transparent fashion. They were actually doing it through the teachers. And again, many times the teachers, they're not going in here with some sort of ideologically driven quest. Some of them do. But there's many others. It's just like, okay, this is just what I got to do. And I guess this is what the experts say. The experts say I have to say these things. And I certainly don't want kids to feel marginalized or bad or not accepted. So I guess I'm going to adopt this ideology when I go in and I teach my 4th graders, right? Is it bizarre to think is anything I just said crazy in the sense that, oh, that could never happen? No, anybody that's been watching what's going on, anybody that watches these teachers on TikTok who have their kids pledge allegiance to the pride flag or who are running around talking about how much they can't wait to tell their kids their new pronouns, you don't get to tell me this isn't happening. But what they need to understand is that for some, it's just happening because they've gotten caught up in all of it. And they didn't get into teaching for ideological reasons, but this is now the environment. This is the culture in which they now swim. Others specifically went into this area because they saw it as an opportunity to educate, train, indoctrinate, and send out. And definitely the people that wrote things like critical pedagogy and the whole revamping the way we think about public education, those guys at the university level specifically did it to achieve this purpose. Because if you're not having enough kid, your political movement dies unless you can get access to other people's kids.
That's exactly what's happening. There's, in a way, progressivism is almost this like vampiric death cult where it cannot reproduce itself organically. And so it has to spread itself almost like a vampire, or there's some elements of like mythology of like if you get bitten by a vampire, you turn into one.
Yeah.
And obviously there's some where there's not the case, but I mean, the same thing with like a virus, right? The only way that it can spread is by infecting other hosts, but the act of infecting a host effectively sterilizes it.
Yeah.
And so it's a self-replicating ideology that actually kills off its own adherents.
Yeah.
And so there's only two ways that it can perpetuate itself. You mass import new voters, or you hijack the minds and worldview of the opposition. And so this is why like the two things that are like totally essential for the left is total cultural, hegemony and dominance, and mass migration and open borders. Those are they're not like policy preferences. They are essential tools for the regime's continuity. Yeah. Because there is no other way that the ideology can perpetuate itself. So conservatives will look at like the great awakening of the last, at this point, like dozen years. And so many of them are kind of blindsided and they're like, where did all this stuff come from? Like what, like if you were a conservative and you just like lived through the last 12 years, you're probably sitting on your couch now thinking like, what the hell just happened?
Yeah.
Right. But in a way, it makes perfect sense what happened. The left categorically, like they'll deny this. I'll see people on the left be like, we need to get beyond the culture wars. Oh, so you're going to drop all the stuff that you're demanding?
Yeah.
Is that no, of course you're not going to do that.
Yeah.
What you actually mean is you want us to stop complaining about the fact that you were doing these things.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, the left are categorically, without a doubt, the aggressors in the culture war.
There's no question.
They started all of this.
Yeah.
Right? There were so many people. I mean, have you ever seen the memes of like a major event will happen in the world and somebody will joke around and they'll have like a meme of like the dominoes falling and it'll be like the last big domino is whatever big, thing that's in the headlines, Iran getting bombed or, whatever it is. And then the first domino is Gamergate.
Yeah.
And so it's like, I've seen people say like, it's crazy that the Ayatollah got killed because the left wouldn't leave our video games alone. Right? Like, even from people that don't support the Iran war, like what they're drawing, the conclusion that they're drawing is these major events that are taking place today that Trump is kind of pushing because he's the president. None of that would have been possible. Trump wouldn't have even been elected if the left had left these culturally shaping institutions alone, but instead they had to hijack them. In doing so, they radicalized the base that previously enjoyed these things that were previously apolitical. Those people got involved and engaged in politics. I mean, it's people like Carl Benjamin, right? Who were apolitical, somewhat liberal person, and now he's, on the right. It's people like that that decided, oh, okay, I have to fight back. So the left started this fight. They're the aggressors in the culture war. And conservatives are sitting here thinking like, what on earth have we just lived through? But it makes perfect sense why the left were aggressors. They had to be. They had to go on the offensive because they have to hijack all culturally shaping institutions in order to perpetuate their ideology, because their ideology is not perpetuating itself organically or biologically. So it must perpetuate itself through indoctrination.
Yeah.
That's one half of the equation. The other half is their total and almost religious commitment to dissolving national borders and mass importations of people from parts of the world with radically different histories, cultures, languages, belief systems, traditions, religions, like people that have no connection to the West, bringing them in by the millions, getting them citizenship, and obviously then they all vote Democrat.
Yeah. Well, and you notice there's two things here. One, it's to the left, it's morally justifiable. When you saw the introduction of Hart-Celler, because the vast majority of immigration in the United States for the first 150 years was coming from places that had, again, some familiarization. Well, not even England, right? You even saw some from Italy, it was largely from Europe. And even then it was largely from Western Europe. Obviously you had some from China on the West Coast and whatnot, and Mexico and the South, but overwhelmingly you look at the numbers for 150 years, it was European immigration. And so it was coming from places where even though they had different religious traditions within Christianity, there was a unifying Christian tradition. And there were several other things that, again, you could come from different parts of Europe, show up to the United States, and see practices and norms that you could recognize and that you could associate yourself with. And then you actually left behind in Europe a lot of the things that you were trying to avoid. So like a very, very rigid class system. That's not to say it didn't exist at all, but it was nothing like Europe. You had a government that was nowhere near as hands-on as the governments that you were used to. There's this one line, I can't remember which Taylor Sheridan show it was, I think it was 1883 or something like that, where they're helping these German settlers cross a river, and the German settlers are saying, we can't swim. And he goes, what do you mean you can't swim? He goes, we were not allowed to learn how to swim in Germany because it was a way of containing you kind of within the region that you were supposed to be in. And he goes, well, what were you allowed to do? And he goes, pay taxes, right? But it was this idea that you were coming to the United States for more freedom than you had ever experienced before, but there was still social, political, and religious structures that you would know and understand. There was legal structures that you would largely understand. Hart-Celler changed all of that, and it makes sense why the left would want to do that. Because if you're importing people of similar theological traditions and things of that nature, you're not as guaranteed that once those people get here, they're automatically voting for your political party. But if you're bringing people over that have very, very different cultural traditions, a couple of things are going to happen. One, when they first get here, it's going to be a lot more of a culture shock, especially if it's mass importation. And so they're more likely to need the sort of public assistance the Democrats are constantly advocating for. Now, I will tell you this much, and this is just a reality of politics. If you vote for a conservative and I lower your taxes, you're like, great, mission accomplished. But that's it, right? I don't got much more. If your job is to be left alone, if your goal is to be left alone, and I succeed in helping the government leave you alone to a greater degree, that's it. There's no reason to really keep coming back for that. But if you're on the other side of the aisle and now you got to this country or you're in this country originally and you're now part of a victim group that gets special privileges as a direct result of me being in office, well, now your vote means your check. Your vote means your livelihood.
It's like the Tammany Hall system.
Exactly like the Tammany Hall system with respect to the Irish in New York. It was the idea that, no, this is the system which provides your bread. It provides your opportunity. There's a process and a structure that you follow to move up within the ranks or be within good standing. And provided that you do those things, the checks come, the benefits come. The moment you break away from those things or the moment you graduate out of them, maybe you become more successful, you're no longer an asset to the organization because they need that dedicated voting bloc. And so it makes sense for two reasons. One, if you look at left-wing ideology, Europeans are the problem. The West is the problem, right? White people are the problem. White men are the problem. And so obviously, if we're all living on stolen land and we all got this through colonization and conquest, and the only reason the West is rich is because of exploitation of other countries, well, then clearly bringing people in from those countries which were brutally colonized and oppressed by Europe is actually a form of achieving greater social justice, right? It's making up for the sins of the past by granting them access to the prosperity that was supposedly stolen from them. That's the moral justification. But once they get there, the practical justification for it is, now I'm the one giving you money, and that gets me loyalty. It gets me votes. It gets me activism. You're going to vote for me. Your children are going to vote for me. Why? Because they're all growing up within an apparatus, within a system that I provided for you. And leaving that system is scary. Leaving that system means leaving the benefits. And so it's not hard to understand for both moral and practical reasons, if you adopt this ideology, why it's self-perpetuating. And that's where we find ourselves in. Now, what was interesting this last election cycle, especially when Trump gained major ground with black men, and he won a majority of male Hispanics, the left got themselves into a bit of a problem because some of the ideological stuff that they were pushing, especially around transgenderism and, men and women's bathrooms, that didn't appeal to some of the immigrant groups that they were actually importing. They might have been able to entice them with certain economic promises, but they weren't going to entice them with the larger woke agenda, which is why woke's not dead, but woke tends to adapt to whatever victim group is most useful for the left to be able to acquire power. Because that is the point. They're the good guys. We're the bad guys. This is how they acquire power. But it's going to be interesting to see how their view of immigration shifts based off of who they think is most likely to give them electoral power. And it's interesting that when we look at places like Somalia, when we look at places like the Middle East, these have been largely considered left-wing allies. And this actually goes back to a whole other story we did about 1979 and what actually happened during the Iranian Revolution, where you had one of the grandfathers of postmodernism and a huge lefty, Michael Foucault, going to Iran and praising the takeover of a religious, government. You now see them coming over, and it's curious because, again, you now actually have American politicians, left-wing politicians, suggesting that the Somali community in Minneapolis is entitled to reparations because of the trauma they've experienced with people going and investigating the fraud that was going on, or ICE actually deporting people. And it flows right into what they're actually trying to do. They're not having their own kids at sufficient numbers. They have to import or indoctrinate yours. The big question, though, is if that's the case, if there may be some people watching this that don't think that we made the case. I think we have, right? But if you accept that, okay, that's an interesting case to be made, I accept that as the strategy. What do we do about it? Well, on the immigration side, it's really simple. You secure your borders, which Trump has largely done. There's a lot of people screaming it down. Oh, he didn't do anything. Yeah, he did. He shut down the borders almost overnight. In fact, there's a really interesting chart that you brought up from the Cato Institute.
Give me a second. I'll pull it up and show you.
The Cato Institute was actually using this chart as a way to bash Donald Trump, and you
Donald Trump Jr. retweeted this.
Yeah, you cleverly pointed out that this looks like a making good on a campaign promise. But you can see right now on this chart, Trump has cut legal immigration more than illegal immigration. And really what it was is Trump not only secured the border, and keep in mind, part of what Cato is doing right here, which I think is a little bit intellectually dishonest, is that a lot of the, quote, legal immigration was Joe Biden completely revamping what refuge seeking looks like. It used to be seeking, if you were actually an asylum seeker, you had to go in and meet certain legal criteria. And Biden just opened all of that up to essentially say, oh, no, these are all legal immigrants, when by any other criteria, they would be considered illegal. So that's the first problem I have with what Cato is doing here. But second of all, it's also this idea that, no, Trump did secure the border, and there's been about there's been over 2 million deportations in the form of forced deportation through ICE and voluntary deportation of people actually just choosing to leave the country. So overall, that's one of the ways that you actually address the mass immigration issue, is you actually crack down on illegal immigration, both from the border perspective, but also from the deportation perspective. And he's also trying to do this as well with things like birthright citizenship, which, is absurd in the way it's written and has been interpreted within the 14th Amendment. So that's step one.
This tweet does a really good job of encapsulating kind of the top line stuff from Cato. Yeah. I'd love to briefly go through it just that way the audience knows that on the immigration front, the left is currently in the process of losing. Yeah. At least right now, because Trump is in office and he's doing these things. So refugee admittance is down 90%. Permanent immigrants is down 50% or more. H-1B is down 25%. New issuance is down about 80%. Actually, I think Cato said that it might be down 90%. Yeah. Student visas are down 40%. Trump not only has a net outflow of illegals, but an increasingly narrow entry for legal immigrants. And when you actually look at this chart here, that's asylum profound. Seeker claims on the southern border in Mexico, down 99.9%.
And by the way, when someone is seeking asylum, that is supposed to be because they're essentially fleeing for their lives. And when they flee for their lives, they're supposed to flee to the first country that can actually grant them asylum, where their lives are no longer in danger. But you have people literally crossing not only several countries to get to the U.S. border, but crossing oceans to get to the U.S. border. And so, again, Biden, to make it legal, Biden just simply changed the definition of what was legal immigration.
Legal permanent visas is at this point, at least a 10-year low, not counting the collapse in COVID where everything was shut down. That's dropped by about 50% since Biden. The new issuance of H-1B visas has collapsed. But even overall, like I've had some people bring up, like, Trump's still importing millions of people from India. He's betrayed us on immigration. and they'll point to H-1B visas as the example because India is overwhelmingly the country that provides them. They're not the only one, but they're definitely the overwhelming majority. It's like 70%. That's just straight up not true. That is a lie when you see people say that Trump is still importing millions of people with H-1B visas. We still have the program, and I don't think we should. I think we should abolish the program. So I totally agree. We need to get rid of it entirely. But he's dropped the total number of visas by about 25% and new issuance by about 80 to 90%. And then the last one is total refugee admittance down 90%. Well, to give you an idea of how bad this was, look at the spike here under Biden. It had gotten so bad on a month-to-month basis that I think by the time Trump took office, there were about 50,000 Haitians in just the state of Indiana.
Yeah.
And in total, the entire population of Haiti, I think it was about 5 to 6% of the entire population of Haiti were living in the U.S. Using the refugee admittance program.
Yeah, well, and this is the other problem too when you look at this, because the states do not have the ability to protect themselves from something like this. It is the federal government's responsibility. I don't want to make that the last one. I also want to look at the international student visas by 40% last summer. Now, I will say I think there's some room for international students, and because you have these programs where U.S. students will study abroad, foreign students will study here. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing in and of itself. But there's no question that we were getting an influx of people that were coming into the United States, and we're actually engaging in some very anti-U.S. protests and rhetoric. And think about how absurd that is. Could you imagine a U.S. student going to a foreign country, especially where some of these students were coming from, and reciprocating that kind of behavior?
If I went to China on a student visa and chanted death to the CCP or death to China,
you wouldn't get deported. You wouldn't have your student visa revoked. You would be in a gulag somewhere. You'd be making Temu clothes, right? Like you'd be making fast fashion, right? So like this is the sort of thing where, again, I'm actually really happy with this. Because the other thing it does is, obviously, when we look at the number of slots that we have in a university, those are not infinite slots. And so the more slots that we don't make available to foreign students, the more that are theoretically available for U.S. students, even though that I'm not sure that the U.S. university system is where I would want a lot of students to go at this particular point. But so that's the first one. I think, again, it is understandable for people to say, I want more. But it is unreasonable to suggest or to anticipate that they're going to get everything they want. It has been less than 2 years since Trump has been in office, and there's no question that when it comes to dealing with immigration, deportations, these are wins. He's done a good job. Maybe it's not as good as you would like. The other thing that I would ask you to consider is what are the barriers that have been standing in his way to do more? And when you do that, you can't just blame the president for not giving you everything you want when, one, the judiciary has been incredibly obstructive on this. Nationwide injunctions which stop the whole process in its tracks. You also see the sanctuary cities, and then people will say, well, shut off funds to them. Okay, the president does not have the authority to just immediately shut off funds to a city that is operating sanctuary policies. There's a due process, there's a budget process, there's everything else, not to mention the fact that all of those budget measures that you would like has to go through the United States Senate. And as long as the filibuster is in place, you need a 60-seat majority, and guess what? We don't have it. So there's a lot of things that Trump probably would have accomplished if he actually had sufficient votes within the Congress, or he had a judiciary that wasn't actively working to obstruct him every step of the way with things like nationwide injunctions. So we're just putting that in perspective when we ask the question, does the right have the will to win? Well, on one of the major issues, and that is going after immigration, again, I think the Trump administration has significantly moved in the right direction. We have demonstrated a willingness to do that. There were some people on the right, again, kind of the libertarian wing, especially within Cato, they've always been more of a free movement of people and products. That's their kind of shtick. But when it comes to the right, they've largely stuck with President Trump on this. Even when things were looking, hostile in Minneapolis, and you had Renee Good and you had Alex Preddy, most of the right was sticking with the president, but you even had some, the squishy middle that was like, oh, well, I wanted it done, but I didn't know it would look like this. It's like, well, what did you anticipate it happening when tens of millions of people have been let in illegally? And now you have local mayors, sheriffs, police officers, district attorneys, Commonwealth attorneys, governors, attorney generals actively obstructing ICE as they try to carry out their duties. Not to mention all of the left-wing protesters that are out there actively obstructing, right? That is difficult to do. And they are specifically doing it because they want to raise the temperature. They want there to be a mistake, they're shooting, something to go wrong so they can then exploit it and convince the mushy middle to be like, oh, I don't want to do it. The second one, and this is the one I'm not as convinced, and that is taking over education. Now, we've already talked about whenever you look at the public school system and out of the 155,000 so donations, 68% of them from public school teachers are going to the left, 93% of college professors. And yet all of these institutions make up some of the highest budget items within your state budgets. This is the part that needs to be understood. Federal spending on your public education represents maybe 8 to 10% of your school budget. Is that about right, Nate? You were on the school board. Federal dollars going into the local school division is only somewhere between 7 to 10% of the overall budget with respect to programs. Yeah. So
our producer, for context, was on our local county school board. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So again, nature that's somewhere between maybe 5 to 10% is probably a good branch. So a lot of things that people get mad at, and again, Donald Trump has diligently tried to shut down the Department of Education. Again, he cannot do that unilaterally. That actually requires the Congress to act as well. But to the extent that he can do it unilaterally, he has tried to get rid of the Department of Education, which, by the way, only came into existence in 1979 under Jimmy Carter. Test scores have not improved as a result. Spending per pupil has gone up exponentially. But that money has largely gone into administrative costs, government programs, many of which have been co-opted and used for left-wing ideological purposes. So Trump's, again, done what he can there. The real question is what are individuals doing at their state level? And I know I used to sit there and rail against my Republican colleagues going, why are we voting for budgets that are just, as a matter of course, automatically raising the amount of money that goes into public schools, automatically raising the amount of money that goes into our university system. And we're looking at these look how much we invested. At the same time that the university system in Virginia was saying that they couldn't afford the $70 million associated with Gold Star family scholarships, one university in Virginia, the University of Virginia, UVA in Charlottesville, got $150 million in the budget for a new art museum. And I'm sitting here looking around at my colleagues going, why are we voting for this? Well, Nick, it's just one vote on the whole budget. And you can't vote against the budget. Yeah, you can. I did it all the time. And then what you do is you go and you explain, look, I am not willing to steal money from my constituents to go into a university system or a public school system that is not producing the results that those parents have a right to expect, especially when they're peddling this kind of ideologically driven nonsense. But we don't have enough elected Republicans that are willing to do that. And I'll tell you why. Because elected Republicans honestly believe that the only thing their constituents care about is the amount of money they spend on education, just top line. Doesn't matter where it goes in education. They just like to go back and tell their constituents, we spent a record number of money on education to take care of our teachers, even though half the time it's not doing that. And then they think the only thing you care about is tuition costs for higher education. Oh gosh, tuition has gotten out of hand. So we're going to go ahead and give more money to higher education to keep tuition low. And then inevitably tuition goes up and the universities create more programs that are pushing left-wing ideology. But hey, conservative parents like to brag that their kids went to UVA or Tech or wherever else it is. And it's not to say that every degree program within those universities are bad. There's a lot of great ones. But there's no question that they're overwhelmingly left-wing, and no matter what degree program you take, you are going to have required courses that will push left-wing ideology on your kids using your tax dollar. Forget your tuition dollars. Using your tax dollars on top of your tuition dollars to push it. And every time I tried to rein that in the General Assembly, not only did the left fight me, Republicans fought me. So I'm going to tell you on immigration, I do think we've proven, at least on some level, that we're willing to fight that battle and fight it successfully. On education, I don't think Republicans have demonstrated that. I will say I'm very encouraged by a growing homeschool movement because that increased exponentially after COVID.
I mean, you said it best that we've talked about this like privately and a couple times on the podcast. And I mean, you were pointing out like to the degree that you have a government run education system, they better be teaching conservative worldviews on these things, right?
Yeah.
So like, I mean, the second the Democrats want to come out and be like, let's abolish the Department of Education and abolish all government intervention in education, that's great.
Yeah.
But until that happens, like, oh, if my tax dollars are going to this, then you're going to be teaching this, you're going to be teaching that, you're going to be teaching this, and you're not going to be teaching X, Y, and Z. And like, you gave me some examples, like, you know, we should be having firearms instruction classes like we had in the 1960s.
Tennessee just did this. Tennessee is like, we're going to mandate gun safety classes in the Tennessee public school system. And you're going to have people on the left that hate it. And I'm going to look right at them and be like,
are you going to carry the bill to abolish the government public school system?
Yeah, no. Okay.
If not, then shut up and go home.
This is what
then how
you
about
wanted.
you go homeschool your kid?
Yeah. This is what you wanted. All right, there we go. We're going to play the game now. I also said this because I have a lot of people. There's a ton of people that ask, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? Because again, the average person can't impact immigration policy. What you can do is you can vote for people that will actually enforce immigration policy, secure the borders, and you can stick with them when the media and everybody else is going out of their way. I mean, how many times did we hear, oh my gosh, this poor Maryland man was deported to El Salvador. Oh, you mean the guy that was implicated in human trafficking? The guy that had been a member of MS-13? The guy that had been arrested for domestic violence? That's your Maryland man? No, that's an El Salvadorian that was in the country and should have been deported. All right, so just don't buy the propaganda that the left is going to push at you. The thing you need to remember is they don't mind lying to you. They don't mind using bad statistics. They don't mind quoting the same bogus study out of Texas that suggests that illegal immigrants are less likely to break the law than natural-born citizens. Right. By the way, there was an excellent video on elephants in the room where he looked specifically at the studies. You'll see like 27 headlines. Oh my gosh, they're all saying the same thing. It all references the same study. And then you dig into your study and you're like, this is garbage. They didn't even have adequate data to make the claim they were. It doesn't matter. It fuels the agenda. They need you to believe it. So when it comes to immigration, you do your part there by electing the right politicians at both the federal and the state level, and then you support them when the left and the media comes after them. But when it comes to education, you actually do have a lot more control. Now, I have parents tell me all the time, well, Nick, that's nice for you. I'm glad you were rich enough to homeschool your kids. We started homeschooling our kids when I had just gotten out of the Army as a sergeant first class, right? And the first job I took living in Northern Virginia, I was not exactly making bank. And what we did is we sacrificed things. We didn't have the big beautiful house. We didn't have a bunch of jewelry. We didn't go on a bunch of expensive vacations. We didn't do that. Instead, we homeschooled. That's what we did. Now I realize that there are some people that are in far more difficult situations, and this is the area, and I have a solution to that too. But here's one thing I want to point out, right? I posted this earlier. I said, people say you have to sacrifice to homeschool. That's true. You also sacrifice when you send your kids to public school. So the question is not whether you sacrifice, it's what you sacrifice. Because you're either going to sacrifice that time with your kids, or you might sacrifice a second income. You either sacrifice that time with your children, and you sacrifice the idea that you are now delegating authority to someone else to be the primary instructors and educators of your children. You're sacrificing the fact that you're not going to have nearly as much control over their curriculum. You're not going to have control over what some other kid with a smartphone. Let's say you're wise and you don't give your kid a smartphone because you know they can't handle the whole internet right now. I'm sorry, does every kid in your kid's middle school class have that same rule? Nope. That's what you sacrifice. I didn't sacrifice those things. I sacrificed other things. And I don't say this to try to make you feel bad about it. I say this, if anything, to be empowering. So understand that there's sacrifices made either way. Either way. if you choose to go one route, you're going to have to spend a lot more time competing with a government institution that we've already clearly demonstrated is not in alliance, is not aligned with your values, your principles, your faith. They just aren't. So that's what you're going to have to contend with. I had to contend with other things to homeschool. We did. So I'm just saying it's sacrifice either way. Choose your sacrifice. But the other thing I will say on this is that some parents will say, "Oh, well, I'm just gonna show more up to the school board meetings, or I'm gonna vote better." That's all great, but understand that this is an institution that has been almost entirely ideologically captured. All of your major teacher unions are incredibly left-wing. The vast majority of your teachers are left-wing. The vast majority of your college professors are left-wing. Do you imagine that showing up diligently to school board meetings is going to just change that? I know a lot of parents that diligently showed up to school board meetings in a county that was overwhelmingly red, overwhelmingly conservative. Do you think they got the books out of the public school library? They did not. Why? Because the school doesn't have to. The school doesn't work for you. You pay your taxes. They get their money from property taxes, which you can't opt out of paying. And then the other half of their budget they get from the state. And if your state's controlled by liberals especially, then they're going to get that indoctrination. You showing up at the school board meeting is not going to change that. It just isn't. You might be able to impact some change. It might be better than it will be somewhere else, but that doesn't mean you fix the problem. Even in a state like Idaho recently passed a bill where if you essay a child and you're convicted of it, they shoot you, right? Idaho has death by firing squad for child essayers. They passed all kinds of laws in Idaho that said you're not allowed to teach critical race theory, you're not allowed to teach queer theory, you're not allowed to push this stuff in our public school system. That's not what it's for. And then somebody went in undercover and talked to a school administrator and they said, "Oh yeah, well, we don't call it that anymore." Why were they so willing to violate the law? Well, either for their own personal ideological reasons or for the fact that they went into the higher ed to get their teaching degree and got indoctrinated. They see it as their personal mission. They see it as a moral obligation to correct your parenting. And it's embedded into the system. So I'm not saying don't fight for the system. I am saying you got to make some real hard decisions on whether or not you're going to expose your children to that system at the same time that you're fighting for it. You can fight for it while keeping your kids out of it. Now, I just put a lot of onus and responsibility on the individual parent for this. And again, there's going to be a lot of people frustrated because a lot of people are fighting to make ends meet. Please don't take this as discouragement or judgment. This is more of just, here's the reality. I'm giving you the truth on the ground. Now, here's my next thing that I'll say to pastors. If you have people within your congregation that would desperately like to either get their kids into a Christian education or would like to get their kids in a homeschool environment and they legitimately can't afford to, well, here's an idea. Before you guys cut your next check for some sort of major production or some sort of overseas ministry, which again, I have no problem with overseas ministry, maybe you need to focus a little bit there first. Because we've shown you the numbers. We should be winning this. And yet we're not. We win some battles here and there, but we're not winning the overall cultural battle. And pastors, you bear some responsibility for that. Because you allowed certain things that belonged to you to be rendered unto Caesar. And now Caesar is using them in the ways that we should not be surprised that they're using them. But the good news is you can take it back. You don't got to wait for a law to pass. You don't got to wait for permission. And by the way, there's pastors doing this. Josh McPherson in Washington State. If Josh McPherson can do what he's doing for primary education, homeschool education, higher education, if he can do what he's doing in Washington State, a state that is overwhelmingly hostile to all of his actions, why can't you do it in your states, especially the ones that would actually support you in the endeavor? You can go out right now and say, you know what? As we look at our tithes and offerings, as we look at the money that we bring into the church, one of the things that we're going to make a priority is we're going to use our infrastructure. We're going to use the talents, experience, and education within this congregation. We're going to use the resources in order to provide an alternative to what is going on within our government-run school system. You can do that right now. And you know what you can do? You can eliminate the barriers that are keeping parents that really, really want an alternative from being able to afford one. You could do it. You could do it. Or, we could just flood the market in sub-Saharan Africa with random flip-flops or clothing drives. You could do that too. Which one do you think would actually have a greater impact for the kingdom of heaven? I'm not saying don't give to international ministries. I think that's a core component of spreading the gospel. But I also think, as I look at the New Testament model, a core component of spreading the gospel is taking care of the people within your own community and congregation. And this could be a critical way that you could do it that would actually make sure the sort of values that we're supposed to want to uplift within the church are reflected within political society. I don't think that's too much to ask. I don't think it's too much for your congregants to ask. And I think it would be an absolutely incredible way that we can move the needle. And I'm not just talking about politically. I'm talking about for the things that matter. Because anybody that's watched me for a while has heard me say this probably multiple times. If you really want to save the country, it's ultimately not going to come from just voting harder or tweeting harder about it. It's going to come when more men and women decide to become godly men and women, then become godly husbands and wives, then become godly mothers and fathers, and raise up a generation of kids to do the same. We've already got the numbers. We've showed you the two ways that we're still getting beat out. These are the things that we can practically do to change those odds. And as Christians pointed out, the numbers are overwhelming. Literally, you're one generation away from changing the whole trajectory. One generation away from changing the whole trajectory by making decisions that you can make right now, that you have full control over. So let's make them. Thank you very much, Christian, for bringing the receipts on all of this. Is a really good topic. I appreciate it. By the way, if you haven't already followed Christian's channel, we have been on him for a while now to start up his own channel. So he has. Christian, where do people find you?
You can just look up my name, Christian Hines. Weird way to spell Hines, Heins. I am currently working on my second video. I don't know when it'll come out, but I am working on it. So I hope to get faster at this as we get along. But no, thanks for promoting it. I was not planning on. I feel like every time I'm on the podcast now, you're doing more to promote my channel than I.
Well, I think your first video is over 60,000. I mean,
yeah,
the video we did on your video got like over 150,000.
I was shocked at how many views that got.
I'm not. It was really well done. It was really well done. Go check it out. He talks about some important things over there. Once again, thank you all very much for joining us. Again, if you found anything useful, if you like and subscribe, it doesn't cost you anything, but it does help out with the algorithm a lot. If you don't like what we said, if you think we're idiots, especially Christian, get in the comments and tell us all about how you think we're idiots. Maybe we'll be able to take your question and respond to it. Who knows? Maybe we'll make an episode out of it one day. All right, one last thing. The Man Book. That's right. My book, Proof That I Can Read and Write. That's right. Take that, John Lovell. Is now out, available for purchase. Again, what I do on this is I'm not preaching to everybody, but I do take the experience I have from being a husband for almost 27 years now, father for 22, soldier for 10, elected official for 10. And I just talk about some of the things I learned and some of the things I think would be good for men to know how to do. There's a wide range of topics here, right? Again, like I say, everything from, self-defense, what sort of home defense weapon is a good one to own. I talk about how to make a good smoked old fashioned, how to cook steak, differences between raising sons and daughters, because there's some very marked differences. So all of that is in here. And if you think that would be of interest to you, or if you think it would be an interest to a loved one, by all means, please order it. How great would it be if the New York Times had to list my book as a bestseller? You just know that would cause them to die a little inside. So go do your part to help destroy the New York Times and go buy the Man Book. Once again, thank you very much, and we'll see you next episode.